She caught her millionaire husband with mistresses, disappeared pregnant, and returned 4 years later, with twin sons who looked just like him. Emma Lawrence stood outside the tall glass tower that housed Grayson Enterprises, her breath catching slightly as she adjusted the small bag in her hands. Inside it was a carefully packed lunch, the one Nicholas always said reminded him of home. She hadn't planned to stop by his office today. It had been a long night, the twins inside her belly had kicked relentlessly, and her back ached. But something in her told her this was important. She had just come from her final ultrasound and had seen them again, 2 perfect boys. They were healthy, strong, and clearly determined to stretch her to her emotional and physical limits. She smiled to herself. She couldn't wait to tell Nicholas in person. He'd seemed distant lately, distracted, but she chalked it up to the usual pressure of managing an empire. He was a CEO after all. He carried the weight of thousands of people on his shoulders. That's why she'd chosen to show up today, without warning, with lunch and good news. To remind him that some things were bigger than power and stress. Like family. The receptionist greeted her by name and smiled, not stopping her as Emma stepped onto the elevator. She knew the way by heart. The top floor, far away from the chaos of everyday operations, where Nicholas kept his office pristine and private. As the elevator opened and she stepped into the silent hallway, her heels clicked softly against the marble. She heard laughter behind the double doors before she reached them. His laugh, deep, familiar, but not alone, female voices, 2 of them. Emma hesitated. Her hand hovered above the handle. She told herself not to assume the worst. Maybe it was a meeting, maybe his assistant had company. She pushed open the door slowly, her heart still calm, her breath steady. But what she saw inside knocked the air out of her like a punch to the chest. Nicholas sat relaxed on the couch in his office, jacket off, drink in hand. Next to him 2 women, one with a hand on his arm, the other laughing a little too closely. He didn't see her at first. They were too absorbed in their flirtation, their closeness, the unspoken intimacy that had no place in the life he had promised Emma. When he did finally look up, it was slow, casual, as if expecting another assistant or employee. Then he saw her. The bag in her hand, the swelling curve of her stomach, her eyes. For one awful second, no one said a word. Emma didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the bag of food or demand answers. She simply looked at him, held his gaze for one long, burning moment, then turned and walked out. Past the stunned women, past the silent hallway, past the smiling receptionist who said, "Have a lovely day," without looking up. She stepped outside into the sharp autumn air, the city rushing around her as if nothing had happened. As if her world hadn't just shattered. She walked 5 blocks before she even realized where she was going. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably him. But she didn't check. She kept walking. She knew now that everything had changed. There was no conversation that could fix what she had just seen. There was no excuse or apology that could make it right. She had come to tell him she was carrying his sons. Instead, she walked away with them still hidden inside her. 3 hearts now beating in silent defiance. And just like that, Emma Lawrence disappeared. The train ride out of Manhattan was long, gray, and strangely comforting. Emma sat by the window, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other holding a small paper coffee cup she had no intention of drinking. She watched the buildings blur into smaller towns, the skyline giving way to trees and quiet roads, until the city that had built her relationship, and destroyed it, was gone. She hadn't packed much, only what she could carry, because she hadn't planned to leave. But after what she saw in Nicholas's office, there was no going back. She had made up her mind the moment the elevator doors closed behind her. Her heart had shattered silently, and yet, all she could think about now was survival. Not revenge, not confrontation, just protection. For herself, for the babies, for the life she needed to rebuild far away from him. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not her sister, not her college friends, not even her landlord. She didn't use her bank cards, she paid for everything in cash. It felt dramatic, like something out of a movie, but the truth was, she didn't trust Nicholas not to come after her, not because he loved her, but because his pride might compel him to fix what he had broken, for the sake of appearances. Emma wasn't interested in being saved, she was interested in never being betrayed again. She found a small rental cottage 2 states away, just outside a quiet coastal town in Maine. The place was old, with creaky floors and a leaky faucet, but it was peaceful. There was a pine tree in the front yard, and seagulls that called to each other in the morning. It was nothing like the penthouse she had once shared with Nicholas, but she could breathe here, really breathe. She contacted a local OB/GYN, who didn't ask questions about why she had moved mid-pregnancy. She found a second-hand crib on Facebook Marketplace and assembled it herself, piece by wobbly piece, while the twins kicked gently inside her. She didn't cry during those long nights, not because she wasn't broken, but because she didn't want her babies to feel her sadness. She told them stories while lying on her back, hands on her stomach, imagining what their faces might look like. She knew they'd resemble him, it was unavoidable. And she also knew that even if it hurt to see him in them, she would love them harder than she'd ever loved anyone. The day she gave birth came earlier than expected. She was 36 weeks when the contractions started, sudden and sharp. There was no one to call, no one to drive her. She took a cab to the local hospital, gripping the armrest with every wave of pain, barely making it through the entrance, before collapsing into a wheelchair. The delivery was long, intense, and filled with moments where she thought she might pass out completely. But when the nurses finally placed 2 tiny boys in her arms, Lucas first, then Oliver, everything else vanished. They were perfect, identical, yet already with subtle differences in the way their lips curved and their fingers curled. She held them both against her chest and whispered, "You're safe now. We'll be okay." The nurses asked about the father for the birth certificate. She left the space blank. She stayed in the hospital for 4 days, then took the boys home wrapped in mismatched blankets. The cottage was colder now, but she didn't mind. She swaddled them tightly, placed them in the crib side by side, and sat nearby every night just watching their little chests rise and fall. Exhaustion crept in like a wave, but she pushed through it with the kind of strength she never knew she had. She fed them every 3 hours, she rocked them during colic cries. She changed diapers by flashlight when the power flickered during a storm. She didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time, but somehow, she found beauty in the chaos. Weeks turned into months, the town slowly became home. She started walking with the boys along the beach in the mornings, wrapped up in a double stroller, their blue eyes watching the sky with wonder. The neighbors got used to her, some offering small help like warm soup or used toys. A woman at the grocery store taught her how to coupon. An elderly man at the park taught Lucas how to throw a pine cone like a ball. These small kindnesses built a world around her, a new kind of family. She never mentioned Nicholas. Not to anyone. When people asked, she simply said the boy's father wasn't around, and then she changed the subject. She kept her last name. She kept the photos of their first smiles to herself, and though the ache of what she'd lost still visited her on the quietest nights, she didn't regret walking away. Because here, in this quiet place, filled with sand, wind, and 2 little boys who now called her Mama, with sticky fingers and sleepy giggles, she had found something Nicholas Grayson would never understand. She had found peace. 4 years passed like a tide, slow but constant, reshaping Emma's world in quiet ways. What had once been raw pain gradually softened into something more complex. A bittersweet mix of strength, exhaustion, and resilience. The little cottage that once felt like a hiding place had become a true home. The cracks in the walls didn't bother her anymore. The floors still creaked underfoot, but the noise had turned familiar, even comforting. Most mornings began before the sun rose, when 2 sets of small feet came thumping down the hallway and climbed into her bed, burying under the blankets with cold toes and tangled hair. Lucas and Oliver, now 4 years old, had grown into sharp, curious little boys. They were inseparable, constantly talking over each other, constantly trying to outsmart her, and always asking questions about everything, from why the ocean moved, to why she always smiled when they said, "I love you." They were beautiful, and the resemblance to Nicholas only grew stronger with time. Sometimes it startled her. Their piercing blue eyes, their defiant little chins, the way they tilted their heads when they didn't understand something. There were days when it was hard to separate her memory of their father from their very presence. But they were not him, they were hers. They had been shaped by her values, her love, her patience and humor. They didn't know anything of betrayal or disappointment, she'd made sure of that. Emma worked part-time at a local bookstore now, where the owner let her bring the boys after preschool on quiet afternoons. They'd sit in the children's section while she stocked shelves or helped a customer find an obscure title. The town had embraced them. The librarian knew their names. The barista at the coffee shop knew she preferred decaf with oat milk. She had built a small, quiet life, filled with routines that gave her comfort. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was hers. Still, there were moments when the past came crawling back. A headline online. A passing conversation. An old memory triggered by a scent or the feel of an expensive fabric. She didn't allow herself to Google Nicholas, though the temptation had been there more than once. She didn't want to know who he'd become, whether he had remarried, whether he had other children. She told herself it didn't matter anymore, but deep down, a tiny sliver of pain still lived inside her. Not because she missed him, but because he had never even looked for them. He had let her walk away pregnant with his sons, and never once tried to find out where they had gone. Then came the invitation. She found it in her mailbox one late afternoon, sand still clinging to her sandals from a walk along the beach. A thick envelope with a gold seal and her full name printed in calligraphy. She almost didn't open it. But curiosity and instinct fought past her caution. Inside was an invitation to a high-profile charity gala, an annual event that she had attended before, long ago, when she had still lived in Manhattan as the wife of Nicholas Grayson. She nearly laughed. Was it a mistake, a cruel joke, or worse, a test? It didn't say who had sent it, but she knew. Her fingers trembled as she held it. She hadn't seen his name or face in years. And yet every cell in her body remembered the way he spoke. The way he stood. The exact tone of his voice when he said the words that made her leave. Pregnant? I don't need you. She could still hear it, like it had just happened. And now, after 4 years of silence, an invitation? She wanted to throw it away, to tear it into pieces and pretend it never reached her door. But something inside her stopped her. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was for her sons. Lucas and Oliver had never met their father, they didn't even know he existed. And part of her, the part that ached on their birthdays when she filled both parent roles alone, wondered if they deserved at least one truth. She didn't answer the invitation right away. She let it sit on the kitchen counter for 5 days. She stared at it every morning while pouring cereal, every night while packing school lunches. On the 6th day she made a decision. If Nicholas Grayson wanted to see her again, then he would. But it wouldn't be the version of her he once knew. He wouldn't find the vulnerable, trusting young woman who brought him lunch and news of their twins. He would see the mother, the protector, the woman who had built a life from nothing and turned heartbreak into strength. And she would not come alone. She bought the boys matching black suits, tiny ones with satin lapels. She chose a soft cream-colored dress that made her feel powerful and elegant. She braided her hair the way she used to before she'd lost herself. And on the night of the gala, she stepped into the ballroom with her chin high, her sons on either side of her, holding each of her hands. It was time. The ballroom shimmered under soft crystal light, the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter filling the air. Wealth floated through the room like perfume. Tailored tuxedos, designer gowns, hushed conversations about investments and philanthropy. Nicholas Grayson stood near the center, surrounded by admirers, business partners and acquaintances, who all saw him as the untouchable golden boy. His black suit was sharp, his hair perfectly styled, and his cool blue eyes scanned the room with the practiced detachment of a man used to commanding attention. He was here out of obligation more than desire. These events had long lost their thrill for him. The drinks all tasted the same, the compliments blurred together, and the people asking for photos were no longer interested in him as a person, just in what he represented. The thought used to flatter him, now it only left him tired. He was answering yet another question about a recent acquisition when something shifted in the atmosphere. A hush, almost imperceptible, rippled through the nearby guests. Heads turned. His assistant paused mid-sentence. Nicholas followed their gaze instinctively, his brows lifting slightly in polite curiosity. Until his eyes locked onto her. Emma. She stepped into the ballroom slowly but deliberately, her figure graceful and poised in a soft cream-colored dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a dream. Her long blonde hair was pulled back in a loose braid, her expression unreadable, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't angry, they weren't soft. They were steady. Focused. Certain. And then he saw them. Two small boys dressed in matching little black suits held her hands on either side. They looked about 4, maybe 5. Their hair was dark, thick and styled neatly, their cheeks flushed with the excitement of being somewhere new and glamorous. But what truly unraveled Nicholas from the inside out were their eyes, mirror reflections of his own, that impossible shade of icy blue that no one in his family but him had ever carried. The noise around him faded into silence. Emma's gaze flickered to him for the briefest second, acknowledging his presence with nothing more than a glance, before she turned her attention to her sons, kneeling down to straighten a jacket button and whisper something that made them both smile. Nicholas couldn't move. Couldn't think. Everything inside him had gone completely still. His mind scrambled for logic. How? Was it possible? Could she have? No. He would have known, she would have told him. But then again she hadn't said a word when she left. He'd watched her walk away without so much as a sentence. He assumed she'd been angry, maybe wanted space. He had told himself she'd overreacted, that she'd come back, but she never did, and he had let her go, believing it was her decision, never once asking himself why she would vanish so completely. Now, looking at the boys, he knew exactly why. He wanted to approach. Every instinct in him screamed to move, but his feet remained rooted to the marble floor while Emma took a few more steps into the room, heads turning to follow her quiet procession. She didn't look uncomfortable. She didn't look uncertain. If anything, she looked like she belonged more than he ever had. Guests whispered, murmurs rippling through the crowd, glancing between her and him. The resemblance was undeniable. One of the boys, Lucas, though Nicholas didn't know that yet, glanced up at him, their eyes locked, and Lucas tilted his head, studying him curiously. Then came the question that shattered whatever self-control Nicholas had managed to hold. "Mommy, is that the man from your picture box?" Emma's lips parted slightly. She looked at her son, then at Nicholas, and finally walked toward him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Dignified. The weight of it crushed the air around them more than any shouted accusation could. She stopped a few feet away, the boys standing close, their little hands still holding hers. Nicholas felt his heart pounding like it hadn't in years. "These are your sons," she said simply, her voice calm, her expression unreadable. He stared at them. At her. His mind screamed with 1,000 questions, but his mouth could only form one word. "Sons?" Emma gave a small nod. He looked again, closer now. The shape of their noses, the arch of their brows, their posture. It was undeniable. For a man so obsessed with control, with certainty, Nicholas felt something inside him collapse. It wasn't just shock. It was regret. Crushing, suffocating regret. "I didn't know," he said, and the words came out barely above a whisper. "You never told me." Emma raised an eyebrow, not in accusation but in quiet acknowledgement of the irony. "I didn't think you'd care." That sentence landed like a blade. He felt it hit deeper than any business failure, any public scandal could have. He wanted to protest, to explain, to tell her he would have cared, that he could have been different, but he knew she wouldn't believe it. And maybe she shouldn't. A quick glance around symbolized that Evie was ready. Or almost ready. The boys looked between them, sensing something but not understanding. Emma kneeled beside them again and smiled. "Why don't you go get a juice box? I saw some near the dessert table." They nodded, still curious about the strange man who had made Mommy go quiet, but trusting her enough to run off. Now they were alone. Nicholas looked at her again. Really looked. She wasn't the woman he remembered. She was stronger, grounded, resilient. And he was not the man she once loved. "Why now?" he asked quietly. She exhaled. "I didn't come for you," she said honestly. "I came to show them that I'm not afraid of you anymore." Nicholas nodded slowly, understanding something in that moment he hadn't been ready to understand before. She didn't need anything from him. But maybe, for the first time in his life, he needed something from her. Nicholas didn't sleep that night. After the gala ended and the guests filtered out, their murmurs still echoing in his ears, he stood in the empty ballroom long after the lights dimmed. The image of Emma's face, steady and sure, and the two boys in miniature tuxedos, his sons, haunted him with relentless clarity. He had faced mergers, lawsuits, and public scrutiny, but nothing had ever rattled him like the quiet truth in her eyes. She hadn't come back angry, she hadn't come back begging. She had come back complete, self-sufficient, with living proof of the family he had thrown away. Back in his penthouse, the silence screamed at him. He walked from room to room, suddenly aware of how empty everything was. There were no toys on the floor, no tiny socks in the laundry, no drawings on the refrigerator. He sat on the edge of his bed, still in his suit, and replayed every moment from 4 years ago. Her standing in the doorway, the expression on her face, the bag in her hand, her silence, his arrogance, the women laughing beside him. He had dismissed her without a word, assuming she would come back, because in his world people always did. But she hadn't. And he had never once gone after her. Until now, he didn't realize how much that had cost him. The next day, Nicholas did what he never thought he would do. He reached out. A mutual acquaintance had greeted Emma at the event and mentioned that she was living in Maine. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He didn't send lawyers, he didn't send a formal request. He sent a letter. A handwritten one, not typed, without a signature block or company seal. He told her that he understood if she never wanted to see him again, but that he would give anything for the chance to know his sons. He didn't demand anything, he didn't mention custody or rights. He simply asked if she would meet him for coffee, just once, no lawyers, no pressure. Emma didn't reply for 2 weeks. When she finally did, it came in the form of a short email, a time, a place. A small cafe by the water in her town, no greeting, no emotion, just clear boundaries. But she agreed to meet. Nicholas flew out the next morning and arrived hours early. He sat in the cafe with 2 coffees, checking the door every 5 seconds, unsure of what he would even say. When Emma walked in, she looked tired but still striking, her hair pulled up, sunglasses tucked into her collar, a coat wrapped around her like armor. She didn't sit down right away, she just looked at him and said, "You have 10 minutes. He nodded, already knowing he didn't deserve more. He began by apologizing. Not with dramatic words but with simple, direct ones. He told her he had been blind, selfish and cruel. That he had failed to recognize what mattered until it was too late. That he wasn't asking for her forgiveness but for the opportunity to be better now. For their children, if not for her. Emma listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't soften. But she didn't walk away either. When his 10 minutes were up, she sat down across from him. "I've raised them without you," she said. "They're healthy, smart, and happy. I don't need anything from you." "But they might." Nicholas looked up, cautiously hopeful. "I don't want to confuse them," she continued. "They know their story in a simplified way, but if I let you in, even a little, you need to understand, this has to be on their terms. You don't get to come and go. If you step in, you stay." He swallowed hard, nodded once and said, "I'm ready." She watched him for a moment longer and then pulled something from her bag, 2 crayon drawings, folded in half. "They made these after the gala. This one's from Lucas and this one's from Oliver. They don't know who you are, but they both drew you." His hands trembled as he opened the papers. One showed a tall man in a black suit, with a small boy holding each of his hands. The other was simpler. Just a big blue eye and a smiling face labeled, "The man from the party." Nicholas couldn't speak, he just stared. "You can meet them," Emma said quietly, "but not as their father, not yet. as someone new. A friend. They'll ask questions, and I'll answer them when they're ready. He nodded again, overcome by emotion. Thank you. Emma stood. Don't thank me, prove it to them. And with that, she walked out, leaving the drawings in his hands. Nicholas remained in the cafe for a long time after she was gone, the weight of those small papers grounding him more than any deal or dollar ever had. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know if he was capable of becoming the man they needed. But for the first time in his life, he was willing to try. Not for pride, not for redemption, but for two boys who had drawn him into their world before he had even earned a place in it. The first meeting happened in a small park near Emma's cottage, beneath the golden leaves of early autumn. Nicholas arrived early, dressed in simple clothes for the first time in years. Dark jeans, a navy sweater, and worn sneakers he had to dig out from the back of his closet. He felt strange without his usual armor of suits and tailored coats. But Emma had asked him to dress casually, to not make the boys feel overwhelmed. He waited near the playground, hands tucked into his pockets, trying to ignore the pounding of his heart as children played and parents chatted nearby. When he finally saw them, it felt like something in the world had stopped spinning, just for a second. Emma walked slowly along the gravel path, holding a hand of each boy. The twins were dressed in matching jackets, their cheeks pink from the breeze, their dark hair tousled by the wind. They looked around with the easy curiosity of children, not knowing their entire world was about to shift. Emma gave Nicholas a small nod but didn't smile. She knelt beside the boys and whispered something, gesturing toward him. Then she stood up and said clearly, "Lucas, Oliver, this is Nicholas. He's someone I used to know. He wanted to meet you." The boys looked at him with interest but no fear. Lucas, always the more direct of the two, walked up first and said, "Do you like dinosaurs?" Nicholas blinked, caught off guard, then smiled genuinely. "I love them, especially the Stegosaurus." Lucas grinned. "That's the best one, he has spikes on his back." Oliver joined them a second later and added, "I like the T-Rex, he's the boss." Nicholas crouched down to their level. "I bet you're both experts." That was all it took. Within minutes the twins were showing him their favorite part of the playground, climbing the wooden ship structure and inviting him to be the captain. Emma stayed nearby, watching closely, arms crossed but not in anger, more like quiet defense. She wasn't protecting herself anymore. She was protecting them. But she didn't interfere. She let the scene unfold, and to her surprise, Nicholas didn't overstep. He didn't act like their father, he didn't push for closeness, he just followed their lead, listening, laughing when they joked, and answering every question they threw at him. Over the next few weeks, these meetings became a regular rhythm. Always in public, always with Emma present. They went to the zoo, to a puppet show at the library, to the beach where the boys built castles and Nicholas helped them collect seashells. He never asked for more time, never demanded to see them alone. And because of that the boys began to open up to him naturally. They started saving stories to tell him, rushing up to him when they saw him, calling out, "Nicholas!" with genuine excitement. It surprised Emma how easily they accepted him. And it surprised her even more how different he was. He didn't bring expensive gifts or make grand gestures. Instead he showed up on time. He remembered the boys' favorite snacks. He asked how their school week went, and listened patiently to every long meandering story they told. One day Lucas fell while running and scraped his knee. Nicholas was the one who scooped him up, comforted him, and sang a silly little song until the tears stopped. Emma had to turn away, swallowing an emotion she didn't expect. Still, she kept her guard up. One consistent month didn't erase 4 years of silence. But she couldn't deny the change in him. He was no longer the man who had dismissed her with a careless phrase. He was quieter now, more intentional, and even uncertain at times. That vulnerability, once so foreign to Nicholas, was what made her start to believe this might not just be temporary. One afternoon in late October they stayed at the park longer than usual. The sun had started to set, casting a golden glow across the trees, and the boys were drawing pictures in the dirt with sticks. Emma and Nicholas sat on the bench, a few feet apart, watching them. "Thank you," Nicholas said, his voice low, "for letting me be here." Emma glanced at him, but didn't answer right away. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was contemplative. "You're doing better than I thought you would," she admitted. "You haven't run." "I've wanted to," he said with a faint smile. "This is harder than anything I've ever done. It's the first time I've been truly scared of failing." Emma looked back at the boys. "They don't need perfect. They need present." Nicholas nodded, taking those words into his heart like a promise. "I want to be that. Not for me. For them. And for you, if you'll let me." She didn't respond immediately, but her expression softened just enough to let him hope. That night, after they said goodbye and the boys hugged him tightly without needing any encouragement, Emma stood by her car and said quietly, "Next time, you can come to the house." Nicholas felt something inside him break open. Relief, gratitude, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. Maybe, it was about building something new. One small moment at a time. The first time Nicholas stepped into Emma's cottage, he felt like he was walking into a life he was never meant to see, yet had longed for, without realizing it. It was small and warm, with faded wallpaper and old hardwood floors that creaked when you walked across them. But every inch of the space spoke of love and memory. Crayon drawings were taped to the fridge in uneven lines, tiny shoes were scattered near the door, and the faint scent of something sweet, maybe vanilla or cinnamon, hung in the air. Lucas and Oliver raced in ahead of him, throwing off their jackets and running to the living room, where a blanket fort half collapsed over a pile of books. Nicholas stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of whether he should follow them or wait for permission like a guest. Emma walked past him, gently brushing his arm as she headed for the kitchen, and for some reason, that quiet gesture steadied him more than anything she could have said. He spent the afternoon with the boys on the living room floor, building Lego towers and pretending to be a monster while they shrieked with laughter. At one point, Emma came in with a tray of snacks and stood watching them silently. Nicholas caught her eyes and saw something that hadn't been there before. Not trust, not yet, but something closer to peace. She didn't speak, just sat nearby and let the scene unfold. Over the next few weeks, visits to the cottage became more frequent. They were still cautious, but less formal. Nicholas helped make pancakes on Saturday mornings, always burning at least one, to the boys' delight. He read bedtime stories, his voice, awkward at first, then slowly growing animated, as the twins demanded voices for every character. He stayed to fix a leaking faucet one day, then returned the next to replace a broken step on the porch. Emma didn't ask him to do any of it, and he never acted like it earned him anything, but each gesture became a quiet offering. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep curled up in blankets on the couch, Emma and Nicholas sat outside on the back steps, wrapped in coats, sipping tea. The stars above the trees were unusually bright, and the night air carried the faint sound of ocean waves in the distance. "I never expected this," she said softly. Nicholas glanced at her, unsure if she meant the life she had built, the reappearance of him in it, or something else entirely. "I didn't either," he admitted. "I thought I could bury everything I did, keep moving forward like it never happened, but it stayed with me. You stayed with me." Emma didn't respond right away. She was looking at the stars, her profile outlined in the faint moonlight. "They might ask about you again," she said finally. "Lucas wanted to know if you used to live in a castle." Nicholas laughed under his breath. "I guess my old place might have felt like one to them." Emma smiled faintly but didn't turn to him. "I told them the truth. That we were once together. That things didn't go the way I hoped. That people make mistakes, and some try to fix them." He felt something twist inside him. Shame, yes, but also humility. Did they understand? They're kids, they understand more than we give them credit for. They sat in silence for a while longer before Nicholas said quietly, "Do you think there's any part of you that could believe in me again? Not for the past, but for who I'm trying to become?" Emma turned toward him then, not with anger, not with the bitterness he feared, but with honesty. "I don't know yet. But I believe the boys see something in you. And that's a good place to start." He nodded, accepting that. He didn't press, he didn't ask for more. A week later, a storm hit the town hard. The power flickered out during the evening, and branches thrashed against the windows. Emma had candles lit, blankets piled up, and was reading a book to the twins by flashlight, when Nicholas knocked on the door, soaked from rain, holding a bag of batteries and hot soup. "You shouldn't have driven in this," Emma said as she let him in. "I didn't want you in the dark alone," he answered. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep in sleeping bags near the fireplace, Nicholas and Emma sat close together, watching the flames. She leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. It was not a promise, not a declaration, but a moment of real closeness. Earned, not taken. And for the first time Nicholas didn't feel like a man trying to reclaim something he had lost. He felt like a father. Like a man finally stepping into the role he should have never abandoned. And beside him sat the woman who had every reason to hate him, yet instead chose to see who he was becoming. The twins' 5th birthday arrived on a crisp spring morning, the kind of day that seemed perfectly tailored for new beginnings. The air smelled of blossoms and earth, and sunlight filtered through the trees that surrounded the little cottage Emma had once chosen as a safe place to disappear. Now, it felt less like a hiding spot and more like a heart that had slowly, patiently opened itself again. There were balloons tied to the porch railing, and the backyard had been transformed into a makeshift celebration space, with picnic tables, colorful streamers, and 2 homemade cakes, one shaped like a dinosaur and the other like a rocket ship, just as Lucas and Oliver had requested. Nicholas had arrived early to help set up. He wore jeans and a gray t-shirt stained with icing and grass, his sleeves rolled up, his hands sticky with tape and ribbon. He moved with the easy rhythm of someone who had learned to stop proving and start participating. He let the twins order him around, let them change the plan every 5 minutes, and when they begged him to wear a paper crown he did it without protest. Emma watched him from the kitchen window, as he helped hang a banner that read, "Happy Birthday Explorers," and felt a mix of pride, warmth, and a quiet disbelief that the man outside was the same one she had once walked away from without a word. Guests began to arrive. Friends from preschool, kind neighbors, the woman from the bookstore, the old man from the park, the yard filled with laughter and the sound of running feet. Lucas and Oliver darted through the crowd in superhero capes, their cheeks flushed with joy, occasionally stopping to show off their gifts or shout instructions to anyone willing to follow their mission rules. Nicholas played every game they invented, crawled through cardboard tunnels, pretended to get zapped by invisible lasers. Emma made punch and answered questions and refilled chip bowls, but every time she caught Nicholas lifting one of the boys onto his shoulders or gently tying their shoelaces, her heart tightened with something she had no name for. As the sun began to set and the children gathered for cake, Emma lit the candles slowly, one for each year they had made it together. Nicholas stood just behind the boys, his hands gently on their shoulders. When everyone sang happy birthday, Emma watched as the twins closed their eyes, made silent wishes, and blew out the flames in unison. The applause and cheers that followed were almost loud enough to drown out the crack in her voice when she whispered, "We made it." Later that evening, after the guests had left and the backyard was a quiet mess of paper plates and popped balloons, the 4 of them sat on a quilt under the stars. Lucas and Oliver were sleepy and full of sugar, curled against each of their parents, their capes still tied around their necks, their eyes heavy but resisting sleep, in the way children do when everything feels too magical to end. Nicholas had one arm draped protectively around both boys, and his other hand reached across the space between them to find Emma's. She didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers with his, and in that small gesture, something shifted permanently. No big speech, no declaration, just a hand finding its way home. They sat there in silence for a while until Oliver murmured, "Are you staying over tonight, Nicholas?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Nicholas spoke first, his voice soft and certain. "If it's okay with your mom, I'd really like to." Lucas turned his head, blinking up at Emma. "Can he? Please?" She looked at them, then at Nicholas. And this time when she smiled it wasn't cautious. It wasn't guarded. It was full and real. "Yes," she said simply. "He can." The boys cheered faintly before dozing off, their heads resting on shoulders that had finally learned how to carry them. That night, Nicholas tucked them in and stayed up late with Emma, the two of them sitting on the porch long after the candles were blown out and the cake was wrapped away. They talked quietly, honestly, about everything that had passed and everything that might still come. No promises, no pressure, just truth. In the quiet hours of the early morning, Nicholas looked out at the backyard, now empty but still glowing with the memory of laughter, and whispered, "I never thought I'd get to be part of this." Emma looked at him and said, "You didn't just show up, Nick, you earned your place." And in that moment, with the moonlight casting silver shadows and the soft rhythm of their son's breathing echoing through the house, they both knew, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. As the author, I believe the ending of this story reflects something deeper than just romantic resolution. It's about transformation earned through humility, trust rebuilt, one quiet moment at a time, and the healing power of presence. Nicholas didn't get a second chance because he begged for it. He got it because he showed up, consistently, and learned how to love without expecting to be forgiven on command. Emma's strength wasn't just in leaving but in raising her sons with grace and dignity, protecting their innocence while carrying the weight of heartbreak. And when she finally allowed Nicholas back into their lives, it wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She waited until he became the kind of man who understood the privilege of being a father and a partner, not just the title. The ending isn't perfect, and that's what makes it real. No grand declarations, no fairy tale fixes, just a mother, a father, and two little boys building something from scratch, stronger than before. It's a quiet kind of happy ending, the kind that lasts.